welcome to Higher Dimensions. I want to thank you for joining me for this episode. I'm sitting outside here in beautiful southern Colorado. It's a nice summer day finally, and so just getting out and enjoying the weather, and want to talk to you today about something that I think has the power to change your life. In fact, I know it has the power to change your life because it's changed mine. I want to talk to you today about how to live your life without judging. It's kind of a radical concept, isn't it? You know, I suppose that for most people, we know that we shouldn't judge. We know the what that we should do. But I don't know if we really get practical ideas for how to actually do it that we can apply to our life. So I want to share some things with you that I think are fairly simple, but can really help you enhance yourself and help you to express a more compassionate, loving, and even peaceful version of yourself. You know, when you live life with a lot of judgment, it tends to rob your peace, it tends to steal your joy, it tends to create a lot of conflict, both inside and inside yourself and in your relationships. And so I think this is a really important topic to discuss. In fact, I would say it's impossible to love yourself or love other people and be in judgment of them at the same time, because judgment creates conditions. And so if we want to experience unconditional love, we have to learn how to love without judging. So in order to understand how to do this, we need to talk about a concept that's called reframing. From a psychological perspective, when we're talking about reframing, we're talking about changing the way we have an experience by changing the meaning that we give to that experience. See, all of us have a preset of beliefs or belief frames through which we filter and sort the experiences that we're having. And one of those frames is judgment. If we could just see that judging something as good or bad or evil and good, whatever terms you might use to describe your judgments, is simply a frame through which we are having an experience. So if you think about actual frames, if you went out and if you went out and paid to have your picture taken, paid a photographer a handsome sum of money to take pictures of you or your family or your kids, and you brought home that expensive portrait, and in order to save money, you decided to put it in a cheaper plastic frame. That portrait is actually going to look different hanging on your wall than if you decide to go out and buy a more expensive wooden or metal frame. See, the frame that you put the picture in really does affect the overall quality of the presentation of the picture. So in the same way, the meanings that we give or the beliefs that we use to sort through our experiences can determine the quality of the experience that we're having. It may not be able to change the experience, but it definitely changes the quality of the experience. So the first thing, if we're going to live life without judging, that we have to understand is that judgment is actually a frame that we put around an experience that governs how we have the experience. So let me give you a couple of examples of how this works. Let's use food for example. I love sushi. I am a sushi lover. I love to go out and eat that. Now, not everybody loves sushi. So you could have two people, say myself who loves sushi, and someone else who, for whatever reason, decided to go there with me. And I could be eating a sushi roll, and I could say, oh, that sushi is so good. Listen to what I did. That sushi is so good. But the other person, maybe they don't like rice, maybe they don't like raw fish, maybe they don't like seaweed, whatever. They eat it and they say, ugh, that sushi is terrible. And so, you see what we did? We actually disconnected from our experience. We actually disowned ourself, a part of ourself, our preference in food, and we project it onto the food itself as though the food itself has inherent qualities of goodness or yuckiness. So that's the frame that we put around the food. So how else might I describe that experience without judging the food itself as inherently good or inherently bad? See, it would actually be more accurate and even more empowering to say, I really love how that sushi tastes. I think that sushi roll is delicious. And then my friend could do the same thing and say, yeah, I don't really like sushi. I don't like the texture of it, and it's just slimy to me, or whatever. What we actually did was we spoke more truthfully and more accurately about the experience. We took the judgment away from the object and we owned our experience in a very empowering way and actually described it more truthfully. See, oftentimes when we are judging things and people, in fact, most of the time, when we're judging things about ourselves, experiences, people as good or bad, and labeling those things, we're really talking about our subjective experience, preference, and opinion. We're not really talking about something that's out there. So, in order to move out of judgment, we have to quit labeling things out there and start owning our own experience and speaking more truthfully and more accurately about it. Let me give you a couple more examples. I have small children, and I'm sure, like many of you that have had small children, sometimes the thought of taking them shopping is not a pleasant idea because how they're going to behave. So my kids, if I take them to Walmart, they're going to go immediately to the toy store or wherever else, and they're going to start grabbing things and putting it in the basket and wanting to buy it, and I'm not going to want to spend that money. And then invariably we would have the dreaded meltdown where there would be conflict and fighting in the store, and they might have a pitch a fit, and it just becomes a horrible experience for everybody, for me, for the kids, for everybody around us, right? So in order to bribe them, in order to get good behavior out of them, what I would do is I would say, okay, if you are a good boy in the store, if you are good in the store, I will get you a toy for under $5, or I will let you buy some candy or some gum in the checkout stand if you are good. And so I take the boys in the store, and invariably we go through the fighting, we go through the meltdown, and I bring them out of the store, and then they're saying, Daddy, I thought you were going to buy me something. Yes, but I was only going to buy you something if you were good, and you were a bad boy today, so I'm not going to buy you anything. What did I do? I put a judgment on my child, on his identity as good or bad, based on one context and one set of behaviors. So I began to realize and recognize where I was doing these things. So in order to change the experience, I had to reframe it. So now when I go into the store, I say, okay, boys, because I have two sons, listen up. Here's the deal. If when we are in the store, you stay with me, if you don't fight with me over what you can have or can't have, if you don't throw any fits, then when we get ready to leave, I will let you pick out something in the checkout stand that you want to have to eat, or some gum or something like that. Or I'll let you pick out a toy that's less than $5. What I did was I set a better set of expectations for the children so that they knew exactly what I expected from them and exactly what would happen if they did not behave in a certain way. Then they can begin to see their own experiences, their own behaviors as simply that, behaviors, expressions of themselves in certain contexts, rather than generalizing themselves or parts of themselves as good or bad. See, people can grow up with this whole good boy, good girl, boy, bad girl mentality, and as they become adults, certain behaviors or expressions that maybe weren't appropriate in their family or they weren't empowered to have, they will then, when they become older and they have the power and in a different context those behaviors are appropriate, but because they judge the part of themselves that wanted those things as bad, they can end up living with a lot of guilt and a lot of limitation by still trying to be that good boy or that good girl. For example, they may go into a store when they're older and they have their own job, and they may want to spend their money on themselves, but they may feel guilty for spending money on themselves and not even know why. And it's because they consistently got the message, if you want something, that makes you a bad boy or a bad girl. So again, the key to all of this is watching your language, watching your thinking, but especially watching your language, and looking for those trigger words: good, bad, terrible, awful, special, whatever the case may be. And when you catch yourself doing that, step back from the experience, step back from the situation, take the photograph out of the cheaper frame, and begin to ask yourself, how else could I think about this experience, or how else could I describe this experience if I didn't use judgment? And what you'll begin to do is you'll begin to find that it is possible to live without judgment, and that actually, when you begin to do that, you're speaking from a more empowered place, and you're speaking more accurately and with more truthfulness and with more integrity about the situation. Let me touch on one last thing, because another way that we use judgment is to keep behaviors that we don't want in check, or parts of ourselves that we don't like. We try to change them or push them away by labeling them as bad or labeling them as good. And so, for example, I've talked about the shadow self in other videos, and we all have things in our shadow self that it wouldn't be in our best interest, it wouldn't be in our highest good or anyone else's highest good. It wouldn't even solve the problem if we acted on those urges. In fact, sometimes if we acted on those urges, it would create even more problems for ourselves. And so we'll label those things as bad and say, I'm trying not to do the bad things and I'm trying to do the good things. And there's different questions that we could ask ourselves. And when you catch yourself labeling something that you want to do, oh, I can't do that because that's bad, catch yourself, step back, take the photo out of the cheap frame, and ask yourself, how else can I think about this? And so one of the ways you might think about this, am I going to like the outcome of this situation? How else can I think about this? Is this behavior, is this expression of my life, is it serving me right now? See, the question, is it serving me right now? Is it for my highest good? Or am I going to like the outcomes, is totally different than labeling it as bad. So I suppose that we all get angry at times at people. Just for example, I suppose we all get angry at times, and there's parts of our shadow self, our animal self, that just wants to tear into the person, maybe wants to start a fight with them. And rather than labeling that as, oh, that's bad, we can step back from the situation and say, if I start a fight here, is it really going to solve the problem? Is it really going to serve me or serve the world or serve people? Is it consistent with my highest values if I do this? And you can begin to think about that, and you can begin to think through your life and actually begin to come up with more creative solutions to your problems. And you can do it guilt-free and without condemnation. So remember, the key to living life without judgment is to recognize that all judgment is a frame that you're putting around your experience. And to get out of judging, all you have to do is catch yourself when you're framing your experiences through that lens or through that frame. And step back from it and say, how else can I think about this situation? And how else can I describe this situation without judgment? And if you'll do that, you can really live life without judgment. It's easy, it's simple, but it does take application and work because it's breaking an old habit. So I hope this helped you today. I hope this blessed you. And whatever time you're watching this, I hope it's good for you. And thank you again for joining me for this. If you haven't subscribed to my channel and you like the content, I'd appreciate that you subscribe or that you share it with your friends. And I will be with you again in another video. Thank you.